Today's topic, the Akashic Record and the Afterlife, that's come about from my interest, my personal interest in trying to understand how do the mechanics of the afterlife work? What are the driving forces? Do things happen willy-nilly in an alternate reality, or are there templates for things to happen? Is there a physics in that area as well? So in this reality, we know that there is a physics that exists in space between us, right? It's not just empty space. There is lots of information packed into the ethers between all things. So I figure there's got to be something like that in the alternate reality that supports those sort of things. So over time, over many years, I've often sort of thought about the Akashic Record, and now that scientists are talking about the Akashic or the quantum field, is it a similar sort of thing? And does that quantum reality, can we translate that into ancient teachings about the Akashic Record? Question, full stop. So that's why I picked this topic today, and I've got the books that I mentioned today. I've got them here, so you can have a look through it. Has anyone got this one? The Complete Idiot's Guide to the Akashic Records. This is actually written by Cynthia and Colin Andrews, and you UFO people should know that Colin Andrews is a crop circle researcher, and we'll touch a bit on that later. But so they've written this book, and it's a lot of information in it, so you're welcome to have a look at it later. And they talk about all sorts of things, not just about the Akashic Records, but their basic understanding, or the underlying principle, is that the Akashic Record underlies all things like reincarnation, after-death communication, near-death experiences, all those types of things, okay? And we'll go through and look at why. But they say in their book, the Akashic Record is a holographic memory bank existing in an etheric field of energy. It's a library of events, emotions, thoughts and intentions of universal consciousness for the past, present and even the future. And in many ways it's analogous to the spiritual internet, a highway of interactive information and record keeping. Interesting thought, isn't it? So, Akasha, or Akasha, however you pronounce it, Akasha, is a Hindu word, or Sanskrit word actually, but the Hindus have this understanding of the Akasha relating to ether. And it's where all the other elements, fire, earth, air and water, they exist within ether, okay? So it's a non-physical, ether is a non-physical substance that provides the template for physical form. And if you were a Reiki group here, I'd be telling you that, we all exist in an ocean of energy, and we all have our own divine templates that manifest that energy in a particular way that delineates us from a tree, from an elephant, and all those types of things, okay? So we follow that manifestation of energy into those forms, using fire, earth, air and water, those elements. So I've broken my own rule here, cardinal rule, do not put too much text on your slide, but I'm doing it today because I just wanted to run through this. In the Hindu text they talk about 7 planes, okay, 7 planes of existence. And as I just go through this, you might be sort of interested to follow that perhaps it equates to the 7 chakras, perhaps. But they talk about the first plane of existence, which is where minerals and the consciousness of crystals exist. The second plane is the etheric plane, where plants and consciousness of nature, spirits and elementals and devas exist. And if you're interested in those, and the elementals and the devas, I recommend the books by Eileen Caddy. She wrote the Kingdom Within, all about the... somebody help me.
Findhorn.
Thank you. All about Findhorn and all the experiences that they had there. And I know in The Kingdom Within, I think she talks about, I think it's in that book, there's a few of them, where there is a gentleman who was there for years, and he actually was interacting with a diva who manifested in physical form as a male. Has anyone read about that story? Yeah. Okay. So
take a picture.
yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, whatever you like. And remember, it'll be on YouTube anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, but take a photo. Yeah, no problem. So the third plane is a mental plane, and it's the animal realm, the consciousness of humans, aliens, and animal totems. And the animal totems, or power animals, in shamanic practice, is what we refer to as power animals. So in the underworld, or the lower world, I should say. But anyway, and now this is where we come into the Akashic plane, the fourth plane, or the astral. So you've got the angels, ascended masters, and universal consciousness. And that's the realm that gives you access to all the other realms and to the Akashic records. Okay, so I guess you could equate that to like the heart chakra, which is the hub of, it connects the 3 lower chakras and the 3 upper chakras. You can access all of those through there. And the fifth template, there is a reason I'm telling you all this. The fifth template is the template plane, where the angelic realms and the spiritual consciousness exist. The sixth realm is the celestial plane, archangels and enlightened consciousness. And the seventh is the causal plane of pure awareness, pure energy, God force and divine consciousness. And that easily equates to the crown chakra. Even this one, the sixth one, the celestial plane, this one here with your third eye, and the spiritual consciousness in the template to me represents the throat chakra, where you are quiet and you listen to the still voice within, So the Hindus have put together they understand different planes where different beings exist, and those planes are all connected. And they're not the only ones. Through history, we've had the Assyrians, Phoenicians, Babylonians, Hebrews and Greeks who all believed and thought it to be true that there was a sacred book of life where all things are recorded for all time, and can be accessed. So, and not just them too. So we've got the Judeo-Christians, and they believe in a book of life. The Egyptians have the Hall of Two Truths. Last year I talked about near-death experiences and the Egyptian perspective, where we covered the hall in the afterlife where the heart is weighed with the feather, and if your heart is heavier than the feather, well, off to you. You're out there. But if it's lighter than the feather and you've got all good deeds like that they've collected, then you go to another realm. But the Theosophists are the ones who are responsible for the term the Akashic record. And they chose that because their understanding, I'll go to the next one, of an invisible substance which is organised in magnetic fields, where physical reality exists as vibrations within the field, equates exactly to what the Hindus understand. So let's just go through that again, because so there's an invisible substance like between me and Marie, organised in magnetic fields. So Marie has her own field, you all have your own field, I have a field, and as closer I get to Marie, the more our fields start to interact.
I can feel it.
And we really love it.
We do, we love it.
And the further away we get, they'll still interact, but I'll start to pick up other fields as well, and Marie's field is magnetic, and strong, and you can sense that. And so they're all things that have their own vibrations in this field, And I know that's not new to most of you, but I'm just, saying it in a different way. So that came into existence in the 1900s, thanks to the co-founder of Helena Blavatsky. In the book by Robert Cheney, Akashic Records, Past Lives and New Directions, he refers to the Akashic record as the cosmic sky, space on a higher vibrational level. So when we do things, when all things that exist and have a field, they imprint a record, supposedly, this is how the idea goes, into the field that they exist in. So Marie's sitting here taking this in. As she's doing that, her field is changing because the information is circulating around, and while that's happening, she's leaving an imprint on the field. Okay, but that imprint that she leaves can also interact with other imprints that people have, those energetic imprints. And supposedly, these are inscribed in glyphs. Now, don't ask me how people know that, except that there are people who read the Akashic Records, and they're inscribed in light. Now, that's really interesting to me, and I'll come back to that in another slide soon. But just remember that the glyphs are inscribed in light, but it makes sense that the energy is imprinted in a glyph, because if you think of the Egyptian, for example, those, but yeah, and all their depictions of their history and the things that they believe on the walls of the pyramid and other places. There's an imprint, but it tells a really big story. So you can't write out the whole story because it just take forever and take up too much space, perhaps, I don't know. But so it makes sense to me that it would be symbolic in a glyph form, okay? And I think energy, we'll get onto that, but energy, it doesn't tell you everything, but it leaves that imprint. And if you can decode that energetic imprint, like, for example, a medium might, right? Then you can get a whole lot of other information from that imprint. So, if there is an Akashic record, why would it exist? That's the other question. Well, why? Why do things happen? Well, one idea is to learn from it, and another is to keep a record of what's going on, all the checks and balances. Is it all happening? Weighing things up and whatever. These are the two ideas, okay? So, Edgar Cayce, as I'm sure all of you are aware, was known as the Sleeping Prophet, the most documented psychic of the 20th century. And he, as you know, he would go into these states and he would access all this information, which is recorded and published in books. I used to have a huge set of those, but I passed them on. But anyway, and they are everything to do from health to reincarnation, to astrology, to things about history and the future, all those sorts of things. And he was accessing, supposedly, the Akashic Records in that altered state of consciousness. How did he do it? That's the question, isn't it? How did he do it? In 1933, he said that Atlantis was near the island of Bimini. And they have, in recent years, they have found these underwater constructions in the area. Here's some more. Quite large. This is the divers up here, so you can see how large they are. There's 3 divers there. And I think from the air you can see a roadway. They call the road to Bimini. So here's an example of being able to access what was called the Akashic Records and find out information. So you could learn lots of things. You could learn about the past, about Atlantis and Lemuria, I guess. Check it all out. There's lots of ideas about Atlantis and why it sort of, disappeared from the civilization, and but so you can access information is basically the idea. And what could we learn from our past? And what could we learn from the future and the present? I mean, it's amazing when you think that there's a whole lot of information stored in energy around us all the time. And I happen to teach shamanic practices, so in that I teach shamanic journeying. And when I did my first training on that years ago, I was blown away after the first weekend, because I went there as a skeptic, as I usually do with these things. And by the end of the 2 days, I was amazed at how much information you can actually access in a shamanic journey. So that really spurred me on to with more of that. So anyway, and Michel Nostradamus, of course, we know there's a lot of things that he's written about and recorded. The thing with reading the Akashic Records, of course, is that sometimes they get it right and sometimes people don't get it right. So it really depends on how you're reading it, how accurate you can be, I think, with getting the information. But it's there nonetheless, I believe. So now the Hindus, and when we're getting onto the checks and balances part of why the Akashic Records might exist, well, the Hindus believe in karma. So that everything you do has, it's action and reaction. And the key principle of their understanding of reincarnation is karma. So you do something great, you get a good life in the future. You do something not so great, you have to come back and do it again, or you'll get into a different situation where, you've got to balance it up and you've got to learn from it, supposedly. Christians they believe in heaven. They have a similar sort of idea, not exactly the same, but an idea that there is a payoff if you do the right thing. And the Egyptians, like I was talking about before, they have the shoe feather. So they're weighing up the heart against the feather, and if the heart's heavier, well, this little guy here is ready to devour it, and you're going to go to a different plane of existence. That's a nice thought, isn't it? Now, some people in my readings about the Akashic Records have said that it's quite easy to access the Akashic Records, meaning that the veil between this reality and being able to decode that information to read the records is quite thin, but you just have to know how to do it. Okay. So in ancient history in Delphi, in Greece, lovely old ruins there, but there was the Delphi Oracle, and she used to go into an altered state of consciousness in a smoky environment, and then people could ask her questions, and she would give them some answers. So obviously in an altered state of consciousness, she was accessing the Akashic Records, and you can imagine in ancient history that through times that there would be people who would, like the monarchy, for example, or people who are going to war or about to go to war or something like that, they would want to know those sorts of things, what's going to happen. The Mayans, they used tobacco, some of that funny tobacco, I think it might have been. Apparently there's over 200 types of tobacco, but there's only 2 that actually get smoked, by them anyway. So, and this is only just been discovered in recent years. This is the only depiction of Mayans using tobacco. It was believed that they did, but they couldn't actually find a lot of evidence. So the Hindus use meditative practices to access information. Okay. And the shamans, of course, and they will often use these face masks so that to help them go into an altered state of consciousness, to keep out all other things around them and then go to the beat of the medicine drum and go into that state. And then you have these sort of things, which I found really interesting, which is where there's depictions in the Bible, descriptions in the Bible of Elijah and Ezekiel and a few others who were taken up into whirlwinds, and this one is where, I think this is Elijah, where he sees the appearance of a fiery chariot with God there, Yahweh there, and he's taken up and he's given information, and that may be a depiction of him actually having a spontaneous Akashic record experience, if there is such a thing. I think there is, and that comes up in Alien Contact as well, where people during their close encounter experiences, where they talk about having these downloads of information that come to them, where a whole lot of information which is often like to do with how the universe works. It's like a very advanced science, but when they come back into when the experience is finished, they either can't quite remember it, and they have a notion that I knew how the universe worked when that happened, but they can't remember. They can't. It's just too much information to take into even our very expansive mind. And it can, and you can access it through dreams too, apparently. And I just thought I'd put in some examples here how scientific understandings came to various people through their dream state. And have any of you ever had the experience where, oh, I've got a problem, I don't know how to solve it, I just go to bed and sleep on it, and then you wake up the next day and you've got it, or if you've got an insight into it, right? So I think that perhaps in your dream state, your dreaming mind, your unconscious mind, and even possibly engages what some people call a superconscious mind, and information comes for various reasons. So these are just 5 scientific discoveries made in dreams I thought I'd touch on. Mendeleev about the periodic table, and he says, in a dream I saw a table where all the elements fell into places required. Awakening, I immediately wrote it down on a piece of paper. Niels Bohr, he got the atomic model. He was having a dream of sitting in the sun with all the planets hissing around on tiny cords, giving him insights about that, how that worked. Alias Howe, he didn't invent the sewing machine, but he significantly improved previous designs and received the first US patent for a sewing machine using the lock stitch design. And he says, they say he might have failed altogether if he had not dreamed he was building a sewing machine for a savage king in a strange country. Interesting, isn't it? Einstein, and as he approached the speed of light in his dream, the colours all blended into one. So he then spent much of his career inspired by that dream, thinking about what happens at the speed of light. And Friedrich Kekule. But he says, while dozing on a bus, he fell into a reverie, and lo, the atoms were gambolling before my eyes. Whenever hitherto these diminutive beings had appeared to me, they had always been in motion. But now, however, I saw how frequently 2 smaller atoms united to form a pair. So he got the molecular structure of benzene through that state. Okay, so information came to him. In all these cases, the information just didn't come to them out of the blue. They'd been focused on it for quite a while, trying to understand things. And it seems that the focus of intention in wanting to know actually attracts the information, which is interesting. Anyone who's heard of Saint Germain should probably, you may not have heard the name Godfrey Ray King associated with it, but he and his wife Lotus actually started the I Am activity, and then there was, which went for a while, and then Elizabeth Clare Prophet broke away, and that's usually what a lot of the people now who get interested in it hear about. But this is from the original, and actually he told the story of that meeting in this book, and it's called Unveiled Mysteries. And this book was written in 1939, so it gives you an idea how old it is. And there's so many interesting stories in older esoteric books that you can access. They're amazing. But anyway, he was an American mining engineer, Guy Ballard, and he'd been sent on government business to a little town next to Mount Shasta over in the United States, okay, situated at the foot of the mountain. And there were rumours at the time that there was a group of divine men called the Brotherhood of Mount Shasta, who formed a branch of the Great White Lodge, and you could call it the Great White Brotherhood, I suppose. And this focus from very ancient times had continued unbroken to when he was there. And so while there, Ballard would occupy his free time trying to unravel the rumour about the Brotherhood. And he fell in love with Shasta, so to fill in his spare time, he'd go for long hikes in the beautiful mountains, which the area, it's just gorgeous, isn't it? He'd go for long hikes out from the little township that was at the foot of the mountain. And I've heard we'll get onto that, but I've heard a lot of interesting stories about Mount Shasta over the years. Anyone ever heard of Brian de Flores? Brian de Flores? Okay. Well, he's the one. I was actually going to put a slide up, but he was an Australian. I think he was an Australian. Was it him? I'm pretty sure it was him. Who was a... oh no, I'm thinking of something else. Sorry. But Brian de Flores was an Australian. I think he was a truck driver. And he had an experience where he met some beings. And these beings, I'm getting two stories mixed up, but this is Brian de Flora's story I'll stick with for now. He had these interactions with him, and from that experience he started writing these glyphs, and then that developed into what he called the language of light. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, and I'm wondering, and he's actually got a website, so if you go to Brian, B-R-Y-A-N, de Flores, F-L-O-R-E-S, and you can see all these beautiful artwork. It's inspired, and it's all got these glyphs entwined in the artwork. And he calls it language of light or sacred language, and there's various different types of things. And I think if you knew how to, you could probably decode that. And I'd love to interview him and just ask him lots of questions. It'd be very interesting. But he was talking about his experience when he was a young man, hanging around with a group of very spiritual people at Mount Shasta, and all the unusual, supernatural, paranormal things that would go on there. And he thought he'd met beings who were not from this world. Anyway, so we've got Guy Ballard here, and he's going for a walk. And so one particular day, he'd been walking around lunchtime. He bends down, he finds a mountain spring with clear, fresh, cold water, and he had a cup in his hand to scoop some up, and he turned around, and there was someone behind him. It was a young man. And before that happened, he felt a current pass through his body from head to foot. And he looked around, and standing directly behind him was a young man who seemed to be on a hike himself. But then Ballard looked more closely and realised he was no ordinary person. And he thought that the man smiled. When he thought that, I'll get it right, the man smiled and said, "My brother, if you'll hand me your cup, I'll give you a much more refreshing drink than spring water." So Ballard gives him the cup, and it was instantly filled with creamy liquid, which is interesting. And handing it back to him, he says, "Drink it." So he did. He says, "While the taste was delicious, the electrical vivifying effect in my mind and body made me gasp with surprise. I didn't see him put anything into the cup, and I wondered what was happening." And he says, "That which you drank comes directly from the universal supply, pure and vivifying as life itself. In fact, it is life, omnipresent life, for it exists everywhere about us, and it's subject to our conscious control and direction, willingly obedient." So he goes on with that, and he talks about, he basically talks to him about a past life that Guy Ballard had had. And what happens, the big kind of long story short, he actually revivifies or triggers a past life experience in the Akashic Records for Guy Ballard to actually have a look at, to show him that this is what happened to you, this is why this is going on in your life right now, and this is what you need to learn, basically. So this person who actually Ballard eventually come to know as Saint Germain, he actually triggered the Akashic Records in full visual form, like a video playing out in front of him. So he says, "Come with me and let us review the physical life in which you used a feminine form in France, wherein you were a singer of splendid accomplishment with a voice of rare beauty and power." And Ballard says, "Immediately, without the least effort on my part, I stood outside my physical body, seeing it clearly as it reposed upon the ground, and I wondered if it would be safe on the mountainside. And in answer to my thoughts, Saint Germain replied, 'Don't be disturbed, not a thing in the world can harm your body while we're away. Observe.' And instantly he saw his body was surrounded by a white flame, forming a circle about 50 feet in diameter. And then Saint Germain places his right arm around him, and he says, 'And I saw we were rising rapidly from the ground, but I soon became adjusted to his vibratory action. There was no definite feeling of motion through space, but presently we looked down upon a village in the south of France.'" So he talks about that, and then he goes on to talk about, Saint Germain says, "Let us recall another of your embodiments, ones that you had in Egypt." And he says, "We rose from the earth and moved rapidly forward, and I was very conscious of the Mediterranean as we passed over its beautiful waters, and we went on to Karnak and Luxor and all that sort of stuff." And Saint Germain says, "Watch closely. This is a record of the very ancient temple in Luxor." So here he is taking him through these experiences by triggering the Akashic Records in this full visual form in front of him, like a movie playing itself out. And I think that's a really intriguing story. So just a little bit of background about Saint Germain. He was then on to be known as one of the Ascended Masters, but he was thought throughout history to have reincarnated many times. I was just having this chat to Barry this morning. He was thought to be the identity of the person who wrote under the name of William Shakespeare, Francis Bacon, and a few other people throughout history. But Saint Germain himself was a really interesting person. In that, and I don't even know who he was. I always thought the Ascended Masters were extraterrestrials myself, but who knows? But he was certainly a very advanced human being who had access to a lot of information. So let's talk about the Akashic mechanics. I think it's actually in the Cynthia and Colin Andrews book. They talk about the Akashic field creating the playing field of matter. And I'm suggesting that the Akashic field equates to what quantum theoretical science is about the quantum, okay, or the quantum field. Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the recently deceased astronaut, very intelligent man, had degrees in lots of things. And he says, information is present everywhere and has been present since the beginning. The quantum vacuum is the holographic information mechanism that records the historical experience of matter, which is very much like we were talking about before in esoteric understandings. Mm-hmm. And after he had his experience in space, which was like a peak experience, a transcendental experience, where his awareness grew beyond just himself, but connecting to the universe, he founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which look into all sorts of interesting things, and the work of, I think, Dr. Dean Radin is involved with that as well. So every thought, feeling and action, so it's encoded in the quantum field, but how is it encoded? Well, I suggest it's through energy. And there's different types of energy. There's kinetic energy, which is from movement. There's thermal energy created from temperature, gravitational, I'm not even going to explain that because that's electric energy from electricity, and magnetic, and nuclear, and potential energy. And there's a lot of potential energy in our reality. And potential energy comes from things like, if you've got a spring, okay, when you hold a spring like this that hasn't been extended, there's no energy in it, but when you pull it apart, it has this potential to have all that energy released, okay? Or if you've got an archer, for example, who has a bow and they pull no energy in it until you pull it back and load it with the arrow and ready to let it go. So that's potential energy. So there's a lot of those sorts of things in our reality. Now, Rupert Sheldrake, who is a biologist, and a few other things, I think, he's quoted as saying that 96% of the universe is now thought to consist of dark matter and dark energy. And what that shows is that regular physics, chemistry and biology are only dealing with 4% of reality that scientists are actually talking about. Okay, so only 4% of reality, the rest is in dark matter and dark energy. And I guess you could equate that to looking at the amount of land on the planet as opposed to the water. It's a heck of a lot more water than there is than land exposed. So we're looking at a reality like this. We're looking through a keyhole to see this huge, there is a huge reality, but we're only getting the keyhole part of it, okay? Dark matter is theoretical matter that exists in space that does not emit or reflect light. And dark energy is an unknown form of energy which is hypothesized to permeate all of space, tending to accelerate the expansion of the universe. Well, that's even been brought into question recently too, that actually the universe isn't actually expanding like scientists thought that it was. And it's interesting that in this age of Aquarius, shall we say, which is focused on science, that science is actually going through a re-evaluation process. They're going back and looking at things that they thought they believed in or thought was true, and finding that it's actually, no, I think we need to reassess that maybe that's not actually correct. And this is what we spent years at high school studying and uni and all those sorts of things. Anyway, now this is a really, really interesting clip that I want to play for you. It's Dr. James Gates, who says on stage with Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's an astronomer, and a few other colleagues, scientific colleagues, he talks about a computer code in the fabric of space.
So where has this pursuit taken you?
Oh my God.
Where have you landed?
Why would you ask that?
I'm asking you that here and now. It's New York City. It's March 7th.
Well, partly it's taken to these very strange images that are behind your head right now. These are pictures of equations. I've been, for the last 15 years, trying to answer the kinds of questions that my colleagues have been raising.
Yeah.
And what I've come to understand is that there are these incredible pictures that contain all the information of a set of equations that are related to string theory. And it's even more bizarre than that, because when you then try to understand these pictures, you find out that buried in them are computer codes, just like the type that you find in a browser when you go surf the web. And so I'm left with the puzzle of trying to figure out whether I live in the Matrix or not.
Wait, you're blowing my mind at this moment. So are you saying your attempt to understand the fundamental operations of nature leads you to a set of equations that are indistinguishable from the equations that drive search engines and browsers on our computers?
That is correct. So,
Wait, I have to just be silent for a minute here. So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code writ in the fabric of the cosmos?
into the equations that we want to use to describe the cosmos, yes.
Computer code.
Computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros.
It's not just sort of resembles computer code, you're saying it is computer code.
It's not even just is computer code, it's a special kind of computer code that was invented by a scientist named Claude Shannon in the 1940s. That's what we find very, very deeply inside the equations that occur in string theory and in general in systems that we could say are supersymmetric.
Okay.
When a scientist is
Time to go
confounded.
home, I think. Where are we going to go? So are you saying we're all just, there's some entity that programmed the universe and we're just expressions of their code?
Well, I didn't say that. Some of those,
like the Matrix? That's what you said.
Some of those codes are showing on the screen behind you right now. They don't look like codes, but these pictures, which we call adinkras, are graphical representations of sets of equations that are based on codes. So this is, in fact, to answer your question more directly, I have in my life come to a very strange place because I never expected that the movie The Matrix might be an accurate representation of the place in which I live.
Jim, may I give you an argument that we don't live in the Matrix?
Please. Yeah. Give me one now, quick.
Very simple argument. There's a property that the real world right down here has that no mathematical equation has, that no solution of an equation has, that no abstract object has. Here in the real world, it is always some moment, which is one of a series of passing moments. And a mathematical equation doesn't have a flow of time in it. It just is.
No,
and this means...
But Lee...
Wait, let him finish. Wait, I need him here and now.
This means that, to me, that the ancient metaphysical fantasy that we quote are just mathematics cannot be true, because in a world that was just mathematics, there would be no moment of time.
Why isn't there math as a function of time?
I'm sorry.
We solve these are differential equations.
But then you lay the solution out. X is a... Yeah.
You're mistaking, you keep using the word is, and I'm talking about the word describe. You see,
but described is fine. But
let me finish, please, since we started with my discussion. The point is that it's fun to talk about some deep metaphysical essence that sits behind physics. But for some of us, It's about trying to find the most accurate way to describe where we live. And so my statement is that in the description of our universe, that is a supersymmetrical universe, which we were going to test in the LHC. If you believe that description, I can show you the presence of these codes. That's my statement.
I came across that clip about 2 years ago, and it's always played on my mind. I think it was about that. So he's saying what the equations that we use to describe the universe have codes embedded in them. And I think that's big for a scientist to say that. It's huge, actually. Well, in my experience, when I saw something like this, when I had a near-death experience open up, and I felt a strong gravitational pull sucking me into that, I've always wondered, what were the mechanics that created that? How did that actually happen? What, is this thing like a wormhole just flapping around in non-ordinary reality and, just sort of comes to rest where I happen to be? I thought, no, it's not. I don't think it's like that. I think that when people have near-death experiences and they see something like a tunnel. Not everyone does, right? Must underline that. But the people who do, and how it opens up, and there's that strong energetic flow that takes them down the tunnel, there must be something that creates that, some force in that non-ordinary reality that exists and clicks into place, under certain situations. Bit like if you took the back off an old analog watch and you see all the different cogs working, things come into play and they all work together. And astral travelling, when people have those experiences, why don't they just fly off? They float away and disintegrate into something. How come their energetic blueprint holds them together? Why do they keep staying in that form? Same with out-of-body experiences. When I had an out-of-body experience and I left my body and went up and saw myself sitting on the veranda looking, and I went up into a bird and looked through the bird's eyes to look down at myself sitting on the veranda, how did I retain knowledge that it was me? How did my consciousness, or whatever it was, how did it get from there to here, up on top of the telephone pole, power pole, and then how did I get back? There has to be some sort of mechanics at play there, some sort of physics, again, in that non-ordinary reality. To me, I started reading about information and energetic coherence. I think we understand energetic coherence in respect to, like we were just saying, how can you have those experiences yet your energetic field remains intact? You stay as you. So, but there seems to be an energetic coherence that holds together in formation, if that makes sense. Holds our formation. I'm just using us as an example, but there's everything, information that holds together a tree and water and all those sorts of things. So information links things as well. So we're all linked here at the moment. Our fields are all linked. And our consciousness would be part of that link. So it links particles and atoms and molecules and organisms, ecologies and solar systems and galaxies and minds and consciousness. So, and that's why in the New Age terminology, people talking about being on the same vibe, because you're linking up with that energy when you're in the same state of consciousness that's similar sort of things. And so you have that sympathetic resonance with other people in this example. So there's coherence in the living world, so which holds us together as humans. Our lips are stopping our mouths from fraying, those sorts of things. So there's coherence that holds that together. Now this is really interesting that I read. In quantum biology, I didn't even know there was a field of study, but it says that signals through our nervous system cannot proceed faster than 20 meters a second. Just think about that bit for a minute. 20 meters per second. If something happens, if I get a pinprick in my finger, the information has to go to my brain and my brain has to do something. Okay, there might be a, ouch, that sort of reflex, okay? So that information cannot proceed faster than 20 meters a second. It cannot carry a large number of diverse signals at the same time. But imagine how many signals are going through our body, our electrical system, which we have, at one particular time for our muscles, our digestion, at the lungs, the heart, the blood, all that. It doesn't add up. So biochemistry is an insufficient explanation as to how that works. So in quantum biology, they suggest that living tissue is a macrocosmic quantum system, meaning that there's more going on with us to keep us the way we are than just our physical form. And some of that would have to do, I would suggest, with our environment. There's a whole, that's just how our physical body works. But what about when we go outside and you're feeling the sun, or there's rain, or that you're feeling the grass under your feet, and all that information is going to your brain. No wonder they say, that nothing can beat the human brain. There's so much information to process all the time. And according to quantum biologists, it can't happen the way we think it does. So there's a coherence in consciousness as well that there's nothing new for you guys. And I guess that's where you could talk about the 100th monkey effect, where you don't have to be close for consciousness to connect and to change things, And it reminds me of the work of Cleve Baxter, a lie detector guy. I forget what that official word is, terminology, but anyway. So he used to hook people up and check out whether they're telling the truth or not. But he decided one day to hook up a plant to that, okay? And he found that plants would respond to his thinking, his emotions. And he did a lot of experiments with that. One particular experiment where he hooked up electrodes to some yogurt. He took some of that yogurt, he flew it to the other side of the world, had someone else connect an electrode up to that there, do something to that small piece of culture, give it a shock or something like that, and there was a register on the other side of the planet at the same time. Now, how does that work? How does that information from there get to there, unless there's some sort of mechanics like an Akashic field that exists? And maybe that could be an explanation of how information from a deceased ancestor comes through to a living person. There's experimental data that shows that these things happen. The same with Dean Radin that I mentioned before, involved with the Institute of Noetic Sciences, who's done a lot of work in random generator experiments. So, and things like where people can pick up, there's a response in the random number generator which increases through human activity just before something happens, and it sort of went up before 9/11, or it goes up before a tsunami or something like that, some sort of thing that affects the collective consciousness. So in a way, that means that we can be celestial receivers. We have the potential to be able to communicate with other realms and other planes of existence. Just like the Aboriginal people in their dream time, and they can commune with their ancestors, or Indigenous people who commune with their ancestors and get information from them. Just like when someone has a near-death experience and they get veridical information from the non-ordinary reality. And veridical means information that they could not possibly know in their ordinary reality. For example, someone has a near-death experience, they make contact in the non-ordinary state with a deceased sibling or a great-grandparent who died before the living was even born, and they had no idea of even their existence. Or they saw them, and that person, say a grandparent, appeared to them in the near-death experience and told them some information, and the living person had never seen the dead grandparent, but they could identify them later out of a book, out of a photo album, for example, those sorts of things. So there seems to be something that exists where information can transfer from one thing to another. Because of my interest in the UFO subject, I just wanted to throw in how extraterrestrial contact can affect the collective imagination of humanity, And it reminds me of people who have close encounters. I've interviewed many hundreds, who some of them talk about having what they call a download of information, and you wonder, well, what's that about? What's going on? Where's that information coming from, and why are they getting it? And it's not always necessarily relates to them. Sometimes it does, and often it doesn't. And what's the purpose? But maybe it's sort of like a peppering in the consciousness, that if it comes down to one person, maybe it can be like a transformer and go out to other people from there, like a hub in human society. Well, it's a possibility, because I know it happens. People report it anyway. Let's say it that way. So could that download, which individuals take personally, could it be a download for the collective, human civilization? I don't know. Just a thought. But I just put this up here because it reminded me of Susie Hansen, who's coming to talk at our UFO meeting in September. And because Susie talks about the dual soul connection. She talks about, part of her soul being connected to extraterrestrials. I guess you'd have to listen to Susie talk about that or read her book. But her book is entitled Dual Soul Connection, an Extraterrestrial Agenda for Humanity, which is an interesting idea. And maybe some of that information, some of the information that she gets comes from them putting it into her energy field, put it that way, and then she passes it on to other people, talks about it to us. But it did remind me of crop circles, actually. Some of the crop circle researchers have changed these 2D images into 3D. On YouTube you can see that, and so I've always described crop circles as being like cookie cutter effects, where they're coming down into the fields and they're creating designs. I know a lot of them are human made, but there are some that don't appear to be, that seem very genuine. And crop circle researchers can identify those because they're just bent over. They're not actually broken like the human-made ones are. And there's magnetic effects, and there's cellular changes in the crop, and all those sorts of things. So, but maybe these come put onto the planet for whatever reason, wherever they come from. Maybe not extraterrestrial, but sort of from some non-human intelligence that puts that into our reality, and we look at them. And I can tell you, we've been to a couple of, we've exhibited a couple of Mind, Body, Spirit festivals, and I always say to people, put the crop circle images up on the ends of our stand, because people will see that from tens of meters away, and that's what would draw them to our stand, because they see these images. Because the unconscious immediately connects to images, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So, and they would see it. It's like moth to a flame. Lots of people would say, "Oh, I didn't know you were here, but I saw those, and I just had to come and have a look." It was just so often. It was amazing. And as soon as I saw crop circles, images of them back in 1990, I was fascinated. That was it. I was hooked. I've just watched them ever since. I'm just amazed at what they are. Now, Graham Hancock, has anyone read his book Supernatural? He was involved in Rick Strassman's DMT project. And in that, so he's taken the DMT, the dimethyl, blah, 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 the spirit molecule, is what we know it as. And he said that during that, it was like there were gigabytes of binary code awaiting understanding. His mind opened and he had this experience of having access to all that information, all that energy that was imprinted in space, basically, in that cosmic sky, you know. And I thought that was a really good way of describing it. Gigabytes of binary code awaiting understanding. And it certainly reminded me of the Akashic field. Now this is something, I just wanted to read this to you to give you another thought. This is Gustav Fechner, who's the founder of experimental methods in psychology. And he says, when one of us dies, it's as if an eye of the world were closed. For all perspective contributions from that particular quarter cease. But the memories and conceptual relations that have spun themselves round the perceptions of that person remain in the larger earth life as distinct as ever, and forms new relations and grow and develop throughout all the future in the same way in which our own distinct objects of thought once stored in memory form new relations and develop throughout our whole finite life. So basically he's saying when we die, all our memories, whatever they are, that are involved with our perceptions about us as a person remain here. But he suggests that those imprints can continue to change as they're interacting with other imprints. And I found that a really interesting thing to think about. Your energetic imprints that you leave behind perhaps may be just as important as the one you take with you when you depart this world. Isn't that interesting?
Fascinating.
I'm just going to put this up. This is another book that I've got. This was Science in the Akashic Field. Irvin Laszlo is a Hungarian. It does make me be more aware of my own energy field and how it might bump up against other people's energy field, and what I want to let into it and what I don't want to let into it. You know what I mean? If these things last a lot longer than what we think they do, then you want to sort of be very wary of what you let in. That brings us to the end of our group today.
That was fascinating, Sheryl.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you for all the research and all the effort you put into it.
There's so much.
It was really fascinating.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I just like to share my own thoughts about things and what it might mean, and or what could our existence mean. Because, this Afterlife group has been going 7.5 years now, and I sort of, part of wanting to understand the afterlife is trying to understand my own existence too. Why do we, what is it? What does it mean to be human? How, what happens after this life, and what's happened before this life, and what is the truth about our civilization and humanity and all those sorts of things. So, yeah.